vanished from the pages. They knew that if Africa remembered its explorers, it would also remember its power. Abu Bakr's disappearance. Your schools lied to you. Your teachers lied to you. Don't get mad at me for exposing the truth. But Columbus didn't discover America. A black king did. And before you start crying about it, give me 30 seconds to explain. Almost 200 years before Columbus ever touched a boat, a West African ruler named Abu Bakr II had already sailed across the Atlantic. But I bet your school left that part out, didn't they? This man wasn't some minor tribal leader. He was the emperor of the Mali Empire, one of the richest civilizations to ever exist. Gold ran through its veins like water. While Europe was fumbling through the Dark Ages, Mali was thriving, educated, sophisticated, and wealthy beyond imagination. Abu Bakr was a visionary. Imagine sitting on a golden throne, so bright it blinds your guests and still saying, I need to know what's beyond that ocean. He built a fleet so massive the horizon disappeared under his sails. Some say 200 ships, others say thousands, and he didn't just send them, he led them. He passed his throne to his brother, Mansa Musa, the same man history calls the richest person to ever live, and set off to find what lay beyond the sea. Musa later told historians, my brother did not return because he crossed the ocean. That one sentence rewrites everything we were taught. It means Africa wasn't waiting for Europe to discover it. Africa was already discovering the world. Indigenous people in the Caribbean and South America told stories about dark-skinned visitors who came generations before Columbus, wearing gold and speaking foreign tongues. Archaeologists have found African metalwork and symbols buried deep in those lands. But when the evidence surfaced, Western historians shrugged and called it coincidence. Coincidence? Come on now. You don't accidentally send fleets across the Atlantic. You don't accidentally chart the stars with that kind of precision. When Columbus made his so-called historic voyage, he was following paths mapped by people who looked like us. But the world couldn't handle that truth. They needed Africa to look weak, lost, and late to history. They couldn't have a story where a black emperor reached the New World first, so they erased him. They took his name off the maps and replaced it with their own. But lies age badly, and truth always floats back to the surface. The moment you hear Abu Bakr's story, history cracks open, and you realize, black excellence didn't begin with survival. It began with exploration. Picture this, hundreds of ships stretching across the horizon, their sails catching the Atlantic wind, their crews made up of the best navigators in the world, black men from the Mali Empire. These weren't pirates or wanderers. They were scientists, sailors, and dreamers guided by the stars, moving west into waters no European had ever dared to cross. While Europe still thought the ocean ended in dragons and death, Africa was out here testing the limits of the planet. That's not myth, that's recorded history. Chroniclers like Al-Umari documented how Abu Bakr launched one fleet, waited for its return, and when only one ship came back, he didn't panic. He built another bigger, stronger, and said, I will go myself. That's not fear, that's purpose, that's vision. Now, let's talk about what might have happened next. West African sailors already understood the ocean's currents. They used the same trade winds that later carried Columbus's ships, centuries later. Those winds moved from Africa to South America almost like a highway designed by nature itself. They didn't need compasses. They had stars, rhythm, and centuries of seafaring experience. When Abu Bakr's fleet set sail, they weren't guessing. They were following patterns they had already studied. Every fisherman along the coast knew it. The ocean had a rhythm, and Mali knew how to move with it. Here's where things get deep. Centuries later, when Columbus finally reached the Caribbean, indigenous people there told him something strange. They said black men had been here before. They described them as dark-skinned visitors who came from the east. wearing gold and carrying spears with metal tips that didn't exist in the Americas. Columbus wrote it down himself. Let that sink in. The man they praise for discovering America admitted in his own notes that Africans had already been there. Historians downplayed it for centuries, but the evidence keeps popping up like history, refusing to stay buried. In Mexico, archaeologists have found metal alloys identical to those used in West Africa at the time of Mali's Golden Age. In South America, ancient carvings show faces with full lips and broad noses, the same features of people from the Niger River region. Even ancient trade routes in Brazil contain fragments of copper and gold mixtures that match Malian craftsmanship. It's like Abu Bakr's ships left fingerprints across an entire hemisphere, and nobody wanted to admit it. Because if they did, the myth of European discovery falls apart. Think about what that means. For centuries, they painted Africa as backward, tribal, uneducated. But here was an empire building ships that could cross oceans while Europe was still arguing about whether the earth was flat. That's why this story hits so hard. It's not just about one man's voyage. It's about reclaiming what was stolen from our narrative. Abu Bakr's journey proves that black people weren't just passengers in history. We were the captains. Every map they drew erased us, but every wave remembers our names. Imagine the scene, the sun setting behind him, the coast of Africa fading into gold, Abu Bakr standing on the deck of his lead ship, staring into the horizon. He knows he may never return, but he also knows that if his ships reach land, it will change the story of humanity forever. That's the spirit they tried to erase, the spirit that said, we don't need to wait for permission to explore the world. And whether or not Abu Bakr ever stepped foot on American soil, the legacy of his courage crossed the ocean. It's in the DNA of every dreamer, every builder, every black soul that refuses to accept the limits the world tries to hand us. This wasn't just a voyage, it was a statement. A declaration that Africa had the power to shape the world before the world ever gave it credit. And that's exactly why, when Europe took control of history, they had to make sure Abu Bakr's name disappeared. Because one truth about a king from Mali could unravel their entire lie. When Europe finally caught wind of Abu Bakr's journey, they didn't celebrate it, they panicked. Because if a black emperor had already crossed the Atlantic, it meant everything they were building their future on was a lie. The myth of discovery, the illusion of white superiority, the idea that civilization began and ended with them, all of it collapsed the moment Africa took the lead. So they did what colonizers do best. They rewrote the story. They drew new maps, erased old names, and crowned their own explorers as heroes. By the time Columbus set sail almost 200 years later, the world had been rewritten to make him the first. But the irony is, even Columbus himself admitted he wasn't. In his own journals, he talked about meeting dark-skinned people in the Americas who wore gold, spoke in unfamiliar languages, and carried metal weapons identical to African craftsmanship. He knew, and the European monarchs who funded him knew. But truth was bad for business, and they were building empires off deception. The cover-up didn't happen overnight. It was strategic. They started by controlling education, then religion, then art. They painted Africa as the land of savages while stealing African science, navigation and trade systems to power their own expansion. They renamed our explorers, legends, our kingdoms tribes, and our genius luck. They turned real emperors into myths so they could turn their own myths into history. Abu Bakr wasn't erased because he failed. He was erased because he succeeded too early. His story was proof that black excellence existed long before they wanted to admit it. Proof that Africa didn't need saving. It was already leading. Think about it. If Europe had admitted that Africa reached the Americas first, everything about the age of exploration falls apart. The gold they stole, the lands they claimed, the people they enslaved, it all becomes theft. not discovery. So they built a lie big enough to hide an ocean. They called it progress, they called it destiny, and they taught it to every generation like gospel. And while they were rewriting the books, Africa's stories faded into silence. The griots who once sang about kings like Abu Bakr were silenced, their records destroyed, their songs dismissed as folklore. But truth never dies, it just waits. Every once in a while a crack shows through the paint. An old map labeled Guinea Coast, to the land of the blacks, turns up in a European archive. An African coin appears in a South American dig site. A scholar in Timbuktu uncovers another dusty manuscript describing a fleet that sailed into the setting sun. Each clue whispers the same thing. The story we were taught is not the story that happened. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize how intentional the cover-up was. They didn't just want to erase one man, they wanted to erase the idea that Africa could ever be first. But the truth is louder now than ever. We live in a time where the world is finally listening again. The same voices they tried to silence are echoing across documentaries, classrooms, and conversations just like this one. Every word we speak about Abu Bakr II is rebellion against centuries of falsehood. Every fact we share is a strike against the lie that discovery has a color. Because if a black emperor reached the Americas first, then everything we've been told about who shaped the world is upside down. And maybe that's the real reason his name vanished from the pages. They knew that if Africa remembered its explorers, it would also remember its power. Abu Bakr's disappearance wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of ours, the start of a truth that refuses to drown, even when history tries to sink it. The deeper you dig, the harder it gets to deny that Abu Bakr's fingerprints are all over the Americas. You can change the story, but you can't hide the evidence forever. The ocean itself remembers, and so do the lands that welcomed him. Across the Atlantic, traces of Mali's influence linger in ways that defy coincidence. In Brazil, ancient tribes near the northeastern coast have oral histories of black visitors who came from across the sea, bringing gifts, gold, and wisdom. Their stories aren't vague myths. They describe massive canoes with sails, foreign languages, and intricate jewelry that shimmered in the sunlight. In Mexico, early carvings and temple art show faces that look undeniably African, with wide noses and full lips, features that mirror the people of Mali's Niger River. In Peru and Ecuador, archaeologists have found copper and gold alloys that match the exact chemical composition of metals used in West Africa during the 1300s. How could that happen without contact? It's not imagination, it's evidence. Even oceanographers back this up. The same ocean currents that carried Columbus west already flow naturally from West Africa straight into South America. It's like nature itself built a water bridge, waiting for those who had the courage to follow it. Mali's sailors weren't wandering, they were scientists of the sea. They mapped stars, read wind patterns, and memorized the rhythm of waves. Centuries later, when Europeans finally started crossing those waters, they were sailing the same routes Africa had already mastered. But in European retellings, those paths were suddenly discovered. That's not history, that's plagiarism. And the clues don't stop there. When Spanish explorers began mapping South America, they reported seeing black traders among indigenous groups who carried gold in Malian-style bangles. Some even wrote about settlements deep inland, where the people spoke languages unfamiliar to any European translator. It's not hard to imagine what happened. Abu Bakr's ships reached the coast, traded, possibly settled, and left behind a blend of culture and knowledge. Then centuries passed, stories blended, and the world forgot. But the ocean doesn't forget. Neither do the stones. The same architectural patterns from the Mali Empire, terraced walls, circular compounds, and sacred geometric layouts, appear in parts of Central and South America. built long before Columbus arrived. Historians call it coincidence. They said the same thing when African carvings turned up in the Caribbean, when similar drums were found in the Amazon, when identical agricultural techniques appeared on both sides of the Atlantic. You can only call it coincidence so many times before it starts sounding like denial. Even the indigenous languages whisper the truth. Some ancient words found in the Americas share eerie similarities to Mande words from Mali. Linguists have noticed parallel sounds and meanings that don't align with Asian migration routes, but match transatlantic exchange. It's not proof of conquest, it's proof of connection. Africa didn't invade, it inspired. Abu Bakr's voyage wasn't about taking, it was about learning. That's what separates him from the so-called explorers who came after. He wasn't trying to claim new worlds. He was trying to understand them. And that's why his story hits so deep for us today. Because we've been taught that curiosity and greatness don't belong to us, that black people were always the explored, never the explorers. Abu Bakr's story flips that script. It proves that centuries before colonial maps existed, we were already global thinkers, engineers, navigators, and leaders. When they drew their first maps, they erased our faces from the borders we had already crossed. But every artifact, every carving, every story told by the waves, is a reminder that truth doesn't stay buried forever. The ocean has memory, and it's starting to speak again. Being first has never been easy, especially when the world benefits from pretending you never existed. For Abu Bakr's second, leading that voyage wasn't just about curiosity, it was about rewriting what humanity thought was possible. But the tragedy of being first is that you become too powerful for the story they want to tell. Europe couldn't allow Africa to be seen as the origin of innovation. They couldn't admit that while their kings were fighting over crumbs, an African emperor had already reached across oceans. That kind of truth would have destroyed their entire foundation of superiority. So they built walls around it. They called it myth. They called it exaggeration. And eventually, they called it impossible. When Mansa Musa later ruled Mali, he became world famous for his wealth, his pilgrimage, his gold. But notice how even his story gets told without Abu Bakr's name attached. Musa didn't take the throne because his brother died. He took it because Abu Bakr left to explore. That's the part they never teach, because it reminds us that before there were colonizers, there were African explorers. And those explorers weren't lost, they were leading. The Mali Empire's power didn't come from luck. It came from intelligence, trade, and courage. Its rulers weren't sitting in huts, they were building cities, universities, and economies that Europe envied. The idea that such people could cross an ocean before Columbus shattered the illusion that Europe brought progress to Africa. In reality, Africa had progress long before Europe caught up. And that's why Abu Bakr's story was never allowed to survive. His voyage wasn't just a journey, it was a threat. If the world had accepted that a black man discovered the Americas first, the concept of European dominance falls apart. You can't discover a world that someone else already reached. You can't call yourself civilized while erasing the civilization that inspired you. So they silenced it. They erased his name from textbooks and buried his achievements under centuries of lies. Every time they told children that Columbus discovered America, they were reinforcing a system built on theft, not truth. But erasing Abu Bakr didn't erase what he represented. His courage lit a fire that never went out. It burned through generations of black minds who refused to believe the narrative that we came from nothing. It inspired the dreamers, the inventors, the scholars who knew deep down that their roots ran deeper than any European timeline could explain. And that's the beauty of this story. It's not just about the past, it's about us. It's about what happens when black people stop accepting the version of history that was designed to make them small. Abu Bakr's voyage is proof that our ancestors weren't passengers in the story of civilization, they were driving the ship. Literally. Even now when you hear about Mali, they focus on Mansa Musa's gold but not Abu Bakr's vision. Because vision can't be controlled. You can steal gold, but you can't steal imagination. That's what scared them most. Abu Bakr proved that the African mind didn't need permission to explore, to create, to connect with the world. That's why the price of being first was silence. But that silence didn't last forever, and the moment you speak his name, the silence breaks again. Every time you say Abu Bakr's a second, you're reminding the world that Africa led the way before it was fashionable to give us credit. So when they tell you Columbus discovered America, just smile, because you know better. You know there was a king who crossed the Atlantic not for conquest but for knowledge. And that story, no matter how hard they try to erase it, will always belong to us. Every empire needs a good story, and Europe built theirs on a lie so big it became legend. They told the world that Columbus discovered America, that Europeans brought civilization to savages, that history began the moment their ships left the shore. And generation after generation, we believed it. We repeated it in classrooms, wrote essays about it, and celebrated it with parades. But when you peel back that lie, what you find underneath is the story of a black king who changed everything. And they couldn't let that truth breathe. So they replaced it with a hero who looked like them. They crowned Columbus the father of discovery, because they needed a symbol of white genius. They needed a man whose face could stand at the front of their myth, even if it meant stealing the legacy of someone else. And that someone else was Abu Bakr's a second. You ever notice how the story never quite makes sense? How can Columbus discover a land already filled with millions of people? How can you find a continent that already had maps, architecture, and trade? The only way that story works is if you erase everyone who came before, and that's exactly what they did. They erased the indigenous nations who built civilizations that rivaled Europe's. They erased the Africans who sailed there first. They erased the truth, until all that was left was their version, the version that made them gods of history. But the lie had cracks from the start. Columbus's own journals mention seeing black men among the natives. He wrote about people wearing gold and using metal that came from West Africa. Even his crew questioned how the locals got those materials. But instead of investigating, Europe ignored it. The truth didn't fit the script they were writing. That script became their foundation. They turned theft into discovery, slavery into civilization, and colonization into destiny. That's the lie they sold to the world. Civilization, science, and exploration weren't European inventions. They were African continuations. And once you understand that, you'll never look at to the ones that naturally link West Africa to the Americas. That's the same current Abu Bakr would have followed. The water moves like a memory, carrying the ghost of his fleet across time. It's poetic justice, really. The ocean itself keeping score. And here's the thing, even European explorers left breadcrumbs they didn't mean to. Some early Spanish and Portuguese maps show markings and coastlines that match African knowledge of the Atlantic centuries before their own voyages. Those details didn't appear out of thin air. They came from borrowed knowledge. They studied our roots, our stars, our winds, and then claimed them as new discoveries. They used our genius to build their myths. But the truth keeps breaking through. Every artifact, every manuscript.
More than 3,000 years ago, right in the heart of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs carved giant stone heads, some as heavy as 40 tons. That's about the weight of 20 average cars. There were no writings, no instructions, and nothing to explain why they did it. Just these massive faces, sitting in the jungle staring back at us. Some say they were powerful rulers. Others believe they are evidence of something.
He believed that every problem held a solution waiting to be uncovered through observation of technology lives. Many of these breakthroughs were made by black inventors. Yet history and mainstream media have often ignored their achievements, painting an incomplete picture of progress and innovation. From the bustling streets of early 20th century Cleveland to laboratories, kitchens, and workshops across the country, black inventors have consistently pushed boundaries, defied social barriers, and transformed the world around them. Their creativity did not emerge in a vacuum. It thrived despite systemic racism, limited access to education, and the many obstacles society placed before them. Every device, tool, or method they crafted tells a story of resilience, ingenuity, and determination, stories that demand recognition. Today, we are embarking on a journey to uncover those hidden narratives, to celebrate the pioneers whose names may not be widely known, but whose inventions touch every part of our daily lives. From the streets where Garrett Morgan's traffic lights make our commutes safer, to the homes protected by Mary Van Britten Brown's security innovations, and the hospitals benefiting from Charles Drew's revolutionary work with blood banks, these inventors have quietly shaped the world in ways we often overlook. As we dive into this series, we will explore 100 inventions by black innovators, each with its own fascinating backstory. You will discover how Sarah Good addressed urban space constraints with her folding bed, how Frederick McKinley Jones revolutionized the transport of perishable goods, and how Lonnie Johnson turned a playful experiment into the beloved Super Soaker. These inventions are more than just objects, they represent moments of brilliance, courage, and creativity that changed lives and continue to inspire generations. Our goal is not just to inform, but to inspire. By highlighting these stories, we hope to challenge the traditional narratives that have dominated textbooks and media coverage for too long. Understanding the true history of innovation allows us to appreciate the diversity of minds that contribute to our shared world and encourages young inventors to dream boldly, knowing that their ideas can make a real difference. If you are ready to be amazed, inspired, and enlightened, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Join us on this journey through history, innovation, and untold brilliance, and help us spread the stories that deserve to be heard. By subscribing, you will be the first to catch each episode of this exciting series on black inventions that changed the world. Let us celebrate innovation, honor the visionaries who created it, and remind ourselves that brilliance comes in all colors and from every corner of the globe. Get ready to see the world in a whole new light, one invention at a time. In the early 1920s, the streets of Cleveland, were a chaotic tapestry of horse-drawn carriages, early automobiles, and bustling pedestrians, all moving in a precarious dance dictated by the instincts of drivers and the occasional wave of a traffic officer's hand. Accidents were common, and the dangers of navigating these streets weighed heavily on those who traversed them daily. Among the keen observers of this urban bollet was Garrett Morgan, a man whose curiosity, intelligence, and unwavering determination would lead him to create one of the most impactful inventions in public safety, the three-position traffic signal. Morgan was not only a keen businessman and an inventor, but also a man deeply attuned to the rhythms of city life and the challenges that ordinary people faced each day. He understood that the chaotic conditions on the road were not merely inconveniences. They were life-threatening, and he was compelled to find a solution that would protect his community and the countless individuals moving through the streets. Morgan's inspiration came from witnessing an accident between a horse-drawn carriage and a motor vehicle. a moment that crystallized for him the urgent need for a system that could communicate more clearly and effectively with drivers. At that time, traffic control relied on police officers positioned at intersections, directing vehicles with simple hand signals, flags, or rudimentary signs that conveyed only two options: stop. These signals were often difficult to see, confusing in the dim light of early mornings or evenings, and entirely dependent on human attentiveness, leaving drivers exposed to unpredictable hazards. Morgan envisioned a mechanical solution, a device that could standardize traffic control and minimize human error, creating a more predictable and safer flow of vehicles through the city streets. With his inventive mind at work, Morgan designed a traffic signal unlike anything that had existed before. His system incorporated a post-mounted mechanism with folding arms, each labeled with stop or go, elevated above the streets so that drivers from all directions could see it clearly. But Morgan did not stop at simply replicating existing controls. He introduced a third position that indicated caution, allowing for a transitional phase between stopping and going. This innovation not only anticipated modern traffic patterns, but also addressed the human tendency to misjudge speed or distance, giving drivers an extra measure of time to react and prevent collisions. To operate the signal, a traffic attendant would turn a crank to raise or lower the arms, ensuring that the appropriate instruction was visible to all approaching vehicles. The system was elegant in its simplicity yet revolutionary in its capacity to save lives and organize the increasingly complex flow of urban transportation. Morgan's traffic signal was patented in 1923, marking a milestone in both technological innovation and public safety. He eventually sold the rights to General Electric for $40,000, a substantial sum at the time, but the true value of his invention extended far beyond monetary terms. Morgan's creation set a precedent for standardized traffic management and laid the groundwork for the development of modern traffic lights that are now found in cities across the globe. His foresight demonstrated not only technical ingenuity, but also a profound understanding of human behavior and urban dynamics, recognizing that a safer, more organized street environment benefits everyone, from pedestrians to drivers, and contributes to the smooth functioning of society as a whole. The story of Garrett Morgan and the traffic signal is more than a tale of mechanical invention. It is a story of perseverance, observation, and the courage to challenge the status quo. Morgan operated in a period when racial barriers were formidable, and opportunities for African American inventors were severely limited. Despite these societal constraints, he pursued his vision with relentless determination, proving that innovation transcends boundaries of race and circumstance. His work illustrates how attentiveness to everyday problems, combined with creativity and technical skill, can lead to solutions that profoundly impact millions of lives, often in ways that continue long after the inventor has passed. Morgan's traffic signal also serves as a symbolic reminder that the contributions of Black inventors have historically been underappreciated, yet their influence is woven into the fabric of modern life. Every time a driver approaches an intersection and slows for the yellow light, or navigates the flow of city streets safely, they are interacting with a legacy that originated in Morgan's workshop nearly a century ago. His invention exemplifies the power of seeing the world through a lens of possibility, recognizing dangers that others accept as inevitable, and imagining a mechanism to prevent harm. It is a story that not only celebrates technical achievement, but also underscores the importance of vision, resilience, and the courage to innovate against the odds. In connecting Garrett Morgan's story to the broader narrative of overlooked Black inventors, his traffic signal represents a bridge between everyday life and extraordinary creativity. Just as George Washington Carver transformed agriculture, as Marie Van Britten Brown enhanced home security, and as Charles Drew revolutionized medical care, Morgan's contribution reshaped the urban environment, saving lives and setting a standard for innovation that continues to guide and protect communities around the world. His invention reminds us that progress is often built on the ingenuity of those whose names may not always be celebrated, yet whose work touches millions of people every day. As we reflect on Morgan's achievement, we are encouraged to recognize the countless other inventors whose brilliance has shaped the world in ways both visible and invisible, inspiring us to honor, learn from, and continue the legacy of innovation that knows no boundaries. In the mid-1960s, a time when urban neighborhoods were experiencing rising crime rates and technological solutions for personal safety were virtually non-existent, a remarkable woman named Marie Van Britten Brown was quietly transforming the very notion of home security. While many people accepted the limitations of their environment, Mary refused to resign herself to vulnerability. She understood the fears and anxieties that came with living alone or with family in a world where protection often seemed inadequate, especially for women whose spouses worked long hours or unconventional shifts. Her acute awareness of these dangers was matched only by her inventive mind, and she began to envision a system that could offer a sense of safety and control, allowing individuals to protect themselves and their loved ones without relying solely on external forces like the police, whose response times were often too slow to prevent harm. Maria's approach was revolutionary not because she simply sought to alarm or deter intruders, but because she thought deeply about how technology could be harnessed to empower people in their daily lives. Drawing on her technical curiosity and practical problem-solving skills, she designed the first home security system that incorporated both visual and auditory surveillance, a concept that was decades ahead of its time. Her invention included strategically placed cameras at key points around the home, each connected to television screens inside, allowing homeowners to see visitors or detect unusual activity without ever opening a door. The microphones she installed enabled direct communication with anyone outside, creating a two-way interface that gave residents control over their interaction